Recording now.
Thank you. I call this meeting to order of the Standing Finance Committee of the CSD Board of Directors. We have a quorum. Cheryl McDowell is absent today, but we have a quorum of 3 regular members and myself. Marvin Korn, Mary Maher, and Ted Siegler. There's no chairman's report except to note that the board of directors at its last meeting put out the word officially that we have a vacancy on this committee. I just talked to Asana a few minutes ago to find out if we've gotten any applications. She does not know of any. So the only request I would make is for everybody to put out the word that we're looking for people. I've done what I can to people I know. And we have essentially a couple of weeks to accept applications normally. And then the board, if everything goes according to schedule, makes a decision as to the appointment in a month from the time that they advertised it, which would be the second meeting in November, if everything works out. Of course, we have a vacancy that remains and there's no applications at that time. We have to wait, but I would love, it'd be great, of course, to have a new member appointed within a month from now. So let people know it's a once a month commitment and some ad hoc committee work if you have the energy for that. And it's open to people who are, anybody who's interested in having some background in some kind of financial role is a plus, but not a requirement. So that's the gist of my report today. And I don't know about ad hoc subcommittee reports, which would be the next item. I think we've been talking about ad hoc subcommittees quite a bit in this meeting. And my understanding would be that at this point, the ad hoc subcommittee on the underfunded activities has completed its job and does not need to report. I'll fill in the other members or Ted, I guess, and just to let them know that Marvin and Mary did a final edit, substantial edit of the report that the committee approved on this last meeting. And they essentially carried out the mission that was assigned to them to wordsmith it, make it more readable, also especially more accessible in terms of what the recommendations were, breaking them out in a list. And then I did a little bit of tweaking of that, but nothing substantive. We also added a little bit of language at the beginning to address the point we made about putting this in context, putting the report in context of a multi-part effort. This is the first of 2 reports essentially on underfunded activities. This is the one dealing with funding, specifically finding funds, and it will be followed by a new report, a further report on structural changes, organizational changes, efficiencies, whatever, that would be applied to the problem of funding these services. So we added a little bit of language at the top, and this has been transmitted to the staff, and it will be brought up hopefully on the agenda of the regular board meeting fairly soon. I don't know if Pam has any more comments on that, but she has received it.
It's scheduled to be on the board agenda the first meeting in November.
Yeah, so we're moving ahead with it. And I thank Marvin and Mary especially, and of course Dwayne did a great deal of work on it, and it's very sad that he couldn't be here to get our appreciation for it. But it was a lot of hard work went into that, and a lot of thought, and it's going to be very, very useful for the board. And later on today, of course, we'll be talking about the next committee, the phase 2. So that's all I had as a chairman's report, and I guess I kind of did an ad hoc subcommittee report as a chairman's report, but that's the end of that part of the meeting. Subcommittee member, committee member communications. Anyone have an announcement, a brief report on your activities, or a question for clarification? Hearing none, we'll continue. to public comment, and this is public comment.
I think Marvin might have been trying to speak,
Oh, I'm sorry, Marvin.
but we're not
Oh.
hearing him.
Oh,
You're on
Marvin,
mute,
you're
Marvin.
muted. That's the problem. Yeah, you're muted. Oh, still muted.
He doesn't look muted.
He's talking, but I can't hear him.
Yeah, I don't see the little mute button on his. Oh, now I do.
You're muted.
Marvin, you might click the upward arrow right by the mute button. Click that, it'll open a menu and see if that gives you some options to choose a speaker that might work. If
Or
that makes sense.
microphone.
Or microphone, I mean.
Can't hear you. He said, never mind.
He could call in if he wants.
I hope we resolve this because we want Marvin to be able to speak. Marvin,
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Do you want to
Marvin,
call
There's
in?
a-
You want
Yeah,
to
that's right.
call in by phone? Just call in and use the phone connection.
It's on the
Dial in.
email that was sent this morning.
Yeah. Let me email Marvin really fast here.
Guess when we don't have Osana, everything goes to
Well,
something in a handbasket.
no reflection on Pam though, of course. Hang on a second here. Emails are not as easy to do.
The number's also on the email that Asana sent this morning.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay, I sent him the email. There it goes. So we'll see. We have to have. Okay. For now, we'll continue with public comment. And I don't know if Marvin can hear us. I think he can. Marvin, can you hear us? Okay. He says something like, okay. Let's continue now with public comment. Pam, I guess you have the roster there, right? Is anybody wishing to comment on matters that are not on the agenda and within the jurisdiction of this committee?
I don't see any hands, but I don't have anything electronically.
Okay.
I don't have access to anything electronically. So if somebody sent something in electronically, I don't have record of that.
Okay, there is one attendee.
There's no written correspondence.
Yeah, no
Okay.
written correspondence, and only one attendee who's Harry Farmer, actually.
Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
no hands are raised.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on from there. On the consent agenda, I'm sorry, consent agenda, which is the minutes. I just had one question, and others can, present any questions they have. And I was curious about a word that may have been a little bit ambiguous or confusing. Under regular business, in the 5th paragraph, last sentence, this has to do with the transmittal of the subcommittee report to the board. It says the committee will not go back to the managers with a redefined priority definition. Is it not meaning for now, or is that I don't quite understand that.
I think the intent was that we wouldn't go back to them prior to the update that Marvin and I did. We may go back to them at some point, but there was some discussion about changing the definitions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just clarifying that we wouldn't change the definitions.
Okay.
That's what I intended, or what I thought we said, I guess.
That makes some sense. That makes sense to me. And I don't think it's going to be a big deal either way, because it's, I know we were talking about further changes that might be made that we didn't make them. Quite a
Right.
bit, actually, yeah. Okay, I'll entertain a motion. Unless there's further discussion.
Well, since Marvin can't speak, I guess I'll move to adopt the minutes as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, moved by member Vice Chair Siegler and member Mary Maher, seconded by Mary Maher to accept the minutes as written. Can I see a show of hands for aye? Aye. It's passed 3 ayes, no nays, and 1 absent.
So I still have no audio?
Oh, there we go.
Oh, wait,
Yeah,
I heard
I was
something.
just going to say that, it would be a little problematic to continue a meeting when all the members can't
Yeah,
communicate with each other.
At this point, I might just call, if we take a couple
No,
minutes.
He's on
I
now.
think
He's on now.
Marvin just came on, but
Yeah, I think so.
There you are.
Finally.
Okay, so you're fine. We hear you now. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, you saved us. On to regular business. And the main item, I think, first is, yes, the review of the first quarter budget report and staff recommendation. So Pamela Duffield, could you take it away?
Sure, thank you. So item 3A on the agenda is the review of the first quarter budget report and staff recommendations. Staff recommends the Finance Committee discuss and review the fiscal year 21-22 first quarter budget report, the proposed budget adjustments, and approve recommendation to the Board of Directors. So first I'll highlight the budget adjustments and the reason for them and why they're needed. So during the first quarter, the board has already approved several budget adjustments that you're going to see throughout the first quarter's report. Those budget adjustments that have already been approved were the projects and encumbrances that carry forward that were incomplete at the end of last fiscal year that roll into this year. They could have been contracts that were in place that are reserved for encumbrances, or they could be multi-year projects. So you're going to see those throughout the report, and those are not something that you have to weigh in on today as the board has already approved them. 2 additional budget adjustments that were approved by the board during the first quarter were the in-stream flow study. We had additional budget programmed for that project. And also for most recently, I think on September 30th actually, was the zone 2 to zone 7 Santa Rosa Creek Bridge water line. They needed a change order that was approved that went before the board, and it required a budget adjustment. So those items you're going to see through the report again, but have already been approved for the board, or already been approved by the board. The 2 items that you're being asked to weigh in on today, the one is the facilities and resources lease purchase of a truck. So if you recall, this went to the board in early January to go ahead and finance that truck for the facilities and resources department. But we didn't have the full debt schedule yet. Well, we had the draft of the debt schedule, but we didn't know exactly what month the debt service would begin. So we held off doing a budget adjustment in July until we had that information. So we do have that information now. The debt service began in August of 2021. So we would have 11 months that we would need to budget for the debt service. So we've included that in your report. And then also, you may recall a recent action to the board in September is relating to the fire department receiving the SAFER grant to fund 3 firefighters for a period of 3 years. So again, we need to program the salary and budget for all of those new staff members. This budget adjustment will reflect half the fiscal year, as we anticipate we will have those staff members online sometime on or after January 1st of 2022. Other than that, we can get into the report if you'd like, unless you have any questions regarding the budget adjustments.
Ted.
Yeah. First of all, I will say I'm really excited to see that these reports came straight out of the Tyler Encode system. That's got to be a major milestone and something, Pam, that you're excited about too. The discussion item that I have is related to the SAFER grant. If I recall, I know we had a SAFER grant that was essentially doing the same thing as this one in the past. And my recollection of that was that the intention was that over the 3 years of the grant, that the district would find sustained funding to maintain that 4th firefighter on each shift. And I don't see anything in the district's finances that indicates that we have the ability to sustain funding for this after the grant period is up. So I'd like to know, was that one of the conditions of the grant? And if so, how are we dealing with it?
It is not a condition of the grant. And I think that's further discussion that the board is going to have. At the time that the board approved and accepted the grant, they did have that discussion about how to fund these positions going forward once the grant ends. So I think that discussion will continue, but it's just kicked down the road a little bit because they now have a 3-year period where those positions will be funded.
Mhm.
So I do expect future discussions to ensue.
Yeah, I just recall it was really disruptive when the last grant ended. And, I think we're setting ourselves up for doing that all over again.
Any other questions? I had one question on the enterprise funds. If there's any way to.
You want me to review the report first and then come back
Why
to
don't you do
the
that first?
detailed
Yeah.
questions?
Okay. So you basically you did your first part there was just talking about
the budget adjustment.
Yeah. Why not? If there are no further questions on the budget adjustments, so yeah, Pam, go ahead with the report on the actual budget report.
Okay, so I'm going to fast forward to page 9. So I don't know if you noticed the page numbers there at the top left, and our pages are landscape. So we're still trying to figure out how we're going to make the page numbers a little more visible because it kind of fades into the text of the report. So hopefully you guys didn't have too much trouble identifying the page numbers. So just to kind of recap the format of the report. So Tyler Encode has multiple budget reports that can be run. I think we have about 8 options. So I went through each of the options to compare and try to get the report that people are most familiar with seeing and the columns that you're familiar with seeing. So the first column you're going to see is original budget. And then you're going to see a column next to that called total current budget. So the difference between those two columns would be any budget adjustments that have been approved by the board since the board adopted the budget on August 19th of 2021. In your past reporting, you could see the column that would show you, what those differences were. So as we get into the next page, I'll show you where you'll be able to see that adjusted budget and what it was for. But right now it's just two columns, and you kind of have to do the math, which is kind of awkward, but they don't have a report that shows that dollar amount in the middle of the columns. And the next item you're going to see is period activity. And the period activity is actually the ending month, the last month of the reporting period. So the reporting period we're looking at is July 1st through September 30th. So the period activity is going to be anything that happened in the month of September. Again, that is static in all of their reports. And, I can't eliminate that period activity column. The fiscal activity is all the activity that has occurred during the reporting period. So from July 1 through September 30th is what's reflective in the fiscal activity. Encumbrances are any purchase orders or contracts that we have actually put through the Tyler purchasing system, and we are encumbering them. So, like I've mentioned before, we can encumber certain POs and certain vendors, but we can't do all of them just because of the limitations of having to know how much it's going to be for the year and what charge code is going to be used. We have to have those two factors in order to encumber a purchase order. And for something like I've talked about in the past, Home Depot, we just don't have those factors known to us up front. So we've chosen to not, those more complicated vendors where we don't know what account code is going to be used through the year and to what dollar amount, we're not encumbering those. We're leaving those as internal POs like we were using in the past. Then you get your column. The next column is, what's your difference? They call it favorable, unfavorable. So it's just a nicer way to putting, surplus or deficit, I guess, is increase or decrease. And then the percent remaining in the budget. So that's kind of the format that you're going to be seeing throughout these reports. And again, I tried to pick the report that would be the most familiar to what you've been used to seeing. So then if we fast forward to page 12, that begins the fire department's quarterly report. So about a third of the way down on the page, you're going to see like an indentation in that first column, and you're going to see budget adjustments. So as we talked about a little bit ago, you see your original budget column and you see the total budget column. And if you look at this particular line item for the grant revenue coming into fire, you'll see a difference there. Original budget's 40,000 and the current budget is increased. It's 54,960. So every time that you'll see that difference in those two columns, you're going to see a little detail below that general ledger account, and it's going to tell you that the budget was amended. So, I guess as we go through the year and we start using this feature a little more and start using these reports, putting in more than the resolution and the date is probably going to be more helpful. When I did my first electronic budget adjustment in Tyler, I thought, well, it would be great to have the resolution number and the date of this adjustment. But as I'm going through the report and reading it, going, well, maybe that wasn't the best description that I could have provided. So it's kind of, we're still trying to get familiar with the system. When we put something in there, the description, knowing what, is meaningful and helpful. So, a better description in there would have been, the grant funding. This is some grant funding that the fire department got that we carried forward. This is the protective, the PPE grant that the fire department received last fiscal year. So, we'll get there. And if your committee has that, desire to see a better description, I'd be happy to not put the resolution and date in that and just put a better description of why we're amending the budget.
Mhm.
Moving through just the fire department's quarterly report. So on page 13, again, you see some more detail. So this detail is replacing, sorry, it's at the top of the page and it's account number 01-6033, B as in boy -01. So this is replacing, in the worksheets that you were familiar with before, I would put in there like new budget or specific detail that outlined, additional, like replacing the refrigerator was like a new line item in the budget. So I tried, as I was going through and entering the budget into Tyler, I tried to keep that detail for you. It's just presented a little different. So in this case, you'll see the total and current budget are the same, but the detail below breaks down what makes up that $6,704. So you'll see that there. You'll see that again down in government and license and fees. And then further down on the page, you'll see the offsetting expenditure part of the budget adjustment for the grant. And then on the next page, on page 14, you'll see the detail that relates to the capital projects that were budgeted. So it's a little different than what you've been, accustomed to seeing. Remember a couple of years ago, we transitioned to the colorful green and white sheets that everybody got used to seeing. So, this is going to be another adjustment, and everybody, including myself, has to get used to reading these reports. And hopefully, after a couple of quarters of seeing these reports, we'll all get a little bit more comfortable and used to what we're looking at. At the bottom of page 14, you will see the surplus and deficit for the fire department as a whole. So keep in mind, when you're looking at total fiscal activity, there's a negative of $500,000. Keep in mind that the gist of the revenue coming into the fire department is property tax based. And that doesn't really happen. We've started to see a trickle in of a little bit of property taxes coming through, more so in October than we really saw in September. We see those big checks come through more like November to December, and then we see the remainder of that in March to April. So, it looks like it's in a bad state of affairs right now because it's such a deficit, but that will get caught up when the revenue gets caught up with the expenditure, more so in the second quarter of the fiscal year. So this is the same situation all the way through all the different budget units. I tried to give you a recap page like you had been accustomed to for all the general fund groupings, and that's on page 9. And then if we fast forward to, let's see, where does enterprise start? The enterprise funds start, the cover page is on page 29. So page 30 will begin the recap, the high level recap of all the enterprise funds, the water fund, the wastewater fund, WRF operations, and WRF capital. So you'll see that summary page is recapped there. And then the following departments are detailed, you know, individually, and they start on page 33 with the detail of all the different departments. Also included for you in the packet is an updated capital improvement list. The list wasn't changed from what the board approved in as far as projects go. We didn't add projects, we didn't delete projects from what the board approved in August. What I did add for you is any activity that's happened during this fiscal year. So that is reflected in column D, as in David.
What
And
page are
you'll
you talking about right now, Pam?
Sorry, I'm on page 52. So you will see the fiscal year project costs to date that happened during this quarter. But again, the projects themselves, nothing was added, nothing was deleted.
Okay.
And there's been minimal activity in the enterprise funds this year. Most of the activity has related to facilities and resources, or I guess it's pros, for the skate park and the public restroom that's in process, and then Tyler Encode.
Mhm.
Pretty much all the capital activity that's happened thus far. So that is all I would like to highlight for you. I'd be happy to answer questions that you may have.
Ted has a question.
Yeah, just one, going back to the enterprise fund recap sheet. And we don't have to look at it, it's a general question. You've got each of the 4 different funds separately totaled. In the old days with the multicolored sheets, the 3 water component funds were totaled together so that we actually saw the whole water picture in one place. And especially considering that the admin charge is all being lumped into the water fund and not into the WRF or the WRF capital. Having those reported separately just means that we got to do a lot of arithmetic in our head. Is there any chance of putting them together as a subtotal?
So I could do that. So when I request this report,
Mhm.
I select the fund and whether it's summary or details. So I could do 2 separate reports in this, behind this cover sheet. And one could be a summary of Fund 11, 39, and 40 together in one report. And then I could do another report just for Fund 12.
Yeah, that, for
I could
me,
totally
I
do
think
that.
that would make more sense.
Okay, yeah, that's an easy change to make.
Mhm. Mhm. Any other questions from the board? From the committee? I had a question. This may be more of a stretch, but
Okay.
I'm wondering specifically on the enterprise funds, if there's a way to gauge the impact of the drought conservation on revenue on a, say, a year-over-year basis or something, some comparative standards. I noticed on the revenues, there's a percent remaining, which I guess is fiscal activity. Was it as a percent of the or fiscal current total budget minus fiscal activity as a percent of the current total budget. So it's 79.96% of revenue in the water fund in by this point, or remaining to be brought in. I'm sorry.
Correct.
What that suggests is that, of course, the amount of revenue that you would normally have, you've had about 20% of it for the year so far. Is there a way to see how if there's an impact that should be of any concern to us from, say, the reduced consumption of water on our revenue in the enterprise funds? Is there a way to gauge that in a way that we can, draw some conclusions from it with any sort of comparison with, say, the prior year or anything like that?
I would just have to run some reports. I'm just still learning all the reports. I don't know if there's a comparison that could be run.
Mhm.
But also keep in mind that we don't have 2 full billing cycles in the system yet either. So in the first quarter, you have to think that we only have 1 billing. So we don't really have 3 months of activity in the system at this point, or in your totals for revenue received. Just because of the way we bill.
That's why year over year to me makes more sense, because you would have that same situation in the first quarter of the prior year too, that you only had 1 billing cycle. So it to me, it's, if there's anything to be concerned about going forward about the adequate, whether we're running more of a deficit than we're planned on, I was just wondering if there's a way to get an early reading on the impact of conservation. But this sounds like something it would have to be a separate report than you're saying.
It would have to be a
And
separate
you couldn't
report,
do it,
yeah.
you couldn't put it in this, and I can understand that. I can understand that.
Right. It would be a completely different format,
Mhm.
because it might not have original budget, current budget, it would compare different things. But it's definitely, I can look to see what kind of comparison reports they have for year to year. I recall that there was one out there, but I think it was related to one general ledger account. I don't know that it was related to a group of them. So, but if it's just one general ledger account, it might also work for your information.
And I definitely second Ted's idea of having the water funds, the 3 water funds with a subtotal. So
Yeah, I can make that
that's
change and
very
update
good.
that for presentation
good
to the
idea.
board. That's a super easy change to make.
Any questions from the other committee members on Ms. Duffield's report? Hearing none, I'd like to go see if there's any public comment. Is there anybody who wants to speak from the attendees on this issue, on this matter?
I don't see any hands.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, sure. Mary.
Just Pam, from your perspective, and of course it's new, so that probably added some, but relative to putting this report together now versus last time or last year, how would you compare it from your perspective?
Oh yeah, it's a huge efficiency measure, huge. So generally it takes me about, I don't know, 2 days sometimes to run all the reports, because in our legacy system, I had to run the reports and then I had to hand enter all of the line item detail into the Excel spreadsheets. Plus I have to verify that the formulas are correct, and change the formulas for each quarter, what the projections were based on. And so, plus when we scan those colored documents, they always gave me a hard time because the file was large and it doesn't want to scan. It just was terrible. And then as the clerk is putting these packages together, it also becomes further complicated because of the color and how it just goes through our copier. It just would that was our headache every time. It would just get hung up there for some reason. So having these not be in color, you know, just having them in black and white, that is a huge help right there. And then, you know, all the math is done. You know, we don't have to worry on the human error side of transposing a number or a formula being incorrect. So to do the report took me about a half a day versus 2 days. So I think it's a great efficiency improvement. And I hope that everybody will learn to like the data as it's presented. So hopefully the board will be receptive to the changes as well.
And I had one more question on the terminology. Period activity, that means for, in this case, that's the September
Just the
activity.
month of September.
Just the month of September.
Correct. Yeah. I really don't like that out there. And unless I export it into Excel, I can't change those titles. And when I export it to Excel, I lose all the formatting of the dollar amounts and the percentages.
Right.
It gets all weird. So
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, I'm just trying to not export it and tweak it. I'm trying to take it right out of the system.
And one possible confusion with I see in that is that this is a quarter, it's a quarter report. So it's the period is logically the quarter. Of course, in this case, period activity and fiscal activity would be identical if they were for the same 3 months. But what happens when we do the next quarterly report, the mid-year report, and you might want to break out the most recent quarter, the second quarter, individually as the period activity, then you have the total fiscal activity for the half year. You would still be just doing a month, right, for the period activity, say it would be December only?
Correct. So period activity and physical activity are not the same time frame.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They're not, but I was wondering if you could, when we do have a second quarter report, is there a way to have a report for the second quarter as a period rather than a month?
Well, the second quarter would go from July 1st through December 31st.
No, second quarter would be from October 1st. I'm talking about just the 3 month.
Well, yeah, but we don't just do a look at 3 months against the budget. We go from July through that period.
Mhm.
So we've never just put a snapshot of a quarter at a time. We always do life to date through the end of that quarter. So in your second quarter report, period activity is going to be December, all the transactions in December. And then the fiscal activity will be July 1st through December 31st, because really 50% of the year has expired at that time. You've received all your revenues in that 50% of the year. You've received, you've paid all expenses. And if I just do it for October 1st through December 31st, your percent remaining and your variable favorable and unfavorable is not going to be accurate, because it's only going to be reflective of 25% of your year, not 50%.
Mm-hmm.
I think what Tom's asking though is there a way to redefine period from being a month to being a quarter?
Yeah.
Not that I saw in the report.
Because it seems that
I wish I could eliminate it. I wish that I could have, I wanted to find a report that didn't have the period activity in it, but there is not one.
Okay, that's basically what I'm driving at. It's a confusing, it's a bit of a confusing thing, because it's just one, it's a very short period, and it doesn't indicate the larger pattern, and it sits out there. I guess we have to, learn to, put it in context or something. But
yeah,
usually when you have a quarterly report, if you had two things, one would be period activity would be that latest quarter, then the fiscal activity would be the year to date, and it's nice to have that, but obviously the important one is year to date. I agree with that, but the period activity is a little confusing. It's confusing terminology. But if that's something, if that's a product of the system, essentially, the automation, the benefits of the system are so much more, so much greater. It doesn't, it's something we just have to put up with, or
Yeah.
I just say, put in context.
Yeah, and again, if I export it to Excel to hide that column, everything else has to be like reformatted.
Okay.
And just because all the
Yeah, so-
formatting, we'd lose, the dollars, and it just gets all crazy.
Ted,
Okay, so that leaves one other question. Is there a way to ask for or program reports to our requirements? I mean, it's just a report generator. The data's all there. It's a matter of pulling the data the way we want it. And so, is there a way to customize it? If so, what would that cost? And be something to look into, because I agree with Tom that ideally you would have period be the quarter that is being reported, and the fiscal activity would be the year to date that's being reported.
So in order for us to do a customized report for something that is not already vanilla in Tyler, they require a $5,000 deposit. They will program the report with the changes. They couldn't really give me a time frame because we had this conversation related to the utility billing total summary report.
Mhm.
And then once they establish that report for us, we have to pay an annual maintenance fee on that report, because once something is customized and they do any system changes, they have to go in and manually put those changes through the report. So it's very costly, and I would want to avoid customized reports at all costs. It just seems like it's a lot of money to be exhausted for something simple. But I'll reach out to them and find out if, how we eliminate that column, if there is a way in this report to eliminate that column.
it strikes me that my impression is that the standard report is a monthly report. This is designed for monthly reports.
It is. All
Yeah.
of their budget reports are designed for the monthly scenario, not quarterly. So that was my struggle.
That's interesting, because I know the CC, the healthcare district, has a monthly report. Every month there's one of these. Essentially, it's quite, it's a little smaller looking. It's like a couple of pages. It's a summary report, but their software, or whatever it is they use, it's not Tyler, does a monthly report which has period activity, fiscal activity to date, and all these things like the variance and the percent remaining on a monthly basis. I don't know if this is a practical idea, if it's too much workload, but maybe I'll just put the idea out there. It may be something that may not be, now that we have Tyler in place, it may be hopefully fairly not hard to do, but I'll just put that out there as a possibility. I know Cheryl's here too, by the way.
Just
Hi,
join.
Cheryl. So Cheryl's joined the meeting. Go ahead. Pam, I'm not asking for a definitive response on that, but is it a conceivable idea to have a monthly report?
Well, that would be up to the board to decide.
Okay.
If the board gives me that direction, then I prepare a monthly report,
Okay.
but it wouldn't have time to go through the committee like it does now.
Yeah. Okay. And that, of course, was different for, say, CCHD. It just goes to the full board all the time.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a different
there's-
process because they don't go through finance and,
Yeah.
I mean, our part of our budget policy says that we just do this mid-year.
Right.
So the quarterly format is a little more than we're required to do. And I think everybody's kind of been accustomed to that. but that would just be something that the board would need to weigh in on if they wanted to change their reporting timing.
Cheryl, I'll give you a chance if you have any questions on it. We're on item 3A,
Oh, okay. Well,
the regular review of the first quarter budget report and staff recommendations. Do you have any questions? Because there is an item of business we have to take care of here. And I want to, after discussion of it, our discussion of it, I want to have a motion, but Cheryl, do you have any questions?
I do not, Tom.
So yeah, the item of business here is to forward a recommendation to the board of directors regarding the budget adjustments that are specified in the staff report for the lease purchase of a new truck, the Santa Rosa Creek Bridge water line, and the Safer Grant adjustment, to approve recommending those to the full board of directors. Do I have a motion on that?
I'll do a motion.
Mary, Pam.
So the budget adjustment is only for the lease of the truck and the Safer Grant. The water line, the Santa Rosa Creek water line bridge has already been completed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Stand corrected. Mary, would you move if for the corrected?
Right.
Yeah.
Two budget items approved.
And do I have a second on it? As Marvin has seconded. It's been moved and seconded that the Finance Committee approve a recommendation to the Board of Directors regarding the two budget adjustments that are specified, one for safer staffing and for the lease purchase of a new truck. Can I see a show of hands regarding that motion? 4 ayes. If motion passes 4 ayes, no nays, no absent. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is a 3B. This is the appointment of a new ad hoc subcommittee for the CCSD strategic plan objective to identify potential structural changes to address underfunded, under-resourced, and understaffed services / support needs. And I've already talked a little bit about this, as you know. This is the second stage of that larger strategic plan process of trying to find ways to pay for things that have been identified by the staff as underfunded, under-resourced, or understaffed. And the first committee, ad hoc committee, has completed its work. This is going to be a new ad hoc committee. It can have some of the same people if they volunteer, or it can be fully new. I got the sense from what people were saying who are on that other committee, subcommittee, that we might want to have some fresh horses here because it's a lot of work and it was a fairly exacting task, and they've done paid their dues for now. So I would entertain volunteers. I think I would, since there's only 4 of us here, or 4 of you here, and 5 of us here, the list of volunteers who weren't already on the other committee is pretty small.
Yeah.
Potential volunteers. But I would like, and also I will say this specifically regarding Ted, because you had demurred from being on the other committee because of your role in on the FFRP board. I would say this committee is not going to be dealing with the use of funds or the question of funds from the FFRP for any activities carried out by the CCSD. So I think both for Mary and for Ted, actually, I would be comfortable with them, themselves being comfortable being on this committee, because it doesn't deal with that question of use of FFRP funds. So without further ado, do I have any volunteers? And I'm also willing to serve on this committee too, so.
I would be glad to help out.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Cheryl.
Now, are we going to do this? When was this committee going to come? Are you doing
Well,
this next year?
It'd be starting right away, and essentially, meeting soon, because this their deadline is for reporting, our deadline for reporting something to the board is January.
Okay, so
But
we have some medical needs in this house, so I don't know how things are gonna work out for me.
Mhm.
But right now, I am willing until we establish a surgery date and different things going on. So I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know how things are gonna unfold
I
here.
could, I could keep, well, we could keep that we could keep that in mind in terms of
Yeah,
deciding whether you're going to be on the committee or not, I guess, right? You're saying you're willing to help if you can.
yes, I am. I am. So,
Okay, Ted, I don't want to put you on the spot, but
But
you've talked about this issue, some of the structural
Yeah.
issues, the fire department especially. So I'd like to hear your point of view.
Well, I can do it. I think, it's the degrees of freedom are fairly limited, but, certainly worth trying to work on.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Maybe I should ask, just to broaden this a little bit and ask Pam this question about, when we talk about structural changes, potential structural changes, that phrase was adopted by the board, I know, and there was not a lot of really deep discussion about what that meant. But since the staff is involved, obviously, in this intimately, if you had explained to us, Pam, what the structural changes are in practice, what would you say?
I wasn't the one that suggested this
Hmm.
change in the language, just so you know.
Okay.
But how I interpret this is, we can use payroll for an example. Is it a structural change if we outsource payroll versus having an in-house person do it?
Mhm.
That's the kind of analysis I think that is expected if we're talking about structural changes.
Okay.
What can we bring in-house that we're currently outsourcing? What can we outsource that we're currently doing in-house to reduce our staffing commitments? It could be either way. So that's what I envision when that is discussed.
Okay. Thank you, because that's my impression too, as to what we were thinking on the board is, and this also includes some of the recommendations made by the first ad hoc committee lead in this direction. There's one obviously, about cross training, some of these closer integration of CAL FIRE and the Cambria fire. These are structural things in my mind too. In other words, this is beyond just finding money somewhere, but finding efficiencies and
Right.
cheaper ways of doing things and coordinating with either outside agencies or as Pam is saying, contracting out. So it's a broader net for finding ways to save money. And I don't think it has to be limited to the general fund in this case, though I think most of the expenses I think we're talking about are probably going to be general fund expenses, but I don't think it should be just necessarily limited to the general fund. If there's cross-training opportunities, for instance, between water and wastewater, I think those should be pursued.
That starts getting to be problematic though, Tom, because the sources of the funds have to be maintained separately. And so, I mean, it's certainly worth looking at, but the cost of delivering the services of the enterprise has to be borne by the the funds that go to the enterprise can only go to the costs of delivering the service of the enterprise. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we start pushing too hard on, let's use just an off the wall, unlikely example that we take, half of the fire crew that's in the firehouse on a daily basis and make them water operators until they get called for for an emergency. Trying to figure out how that would line up with the separation of the enterprises would be a very difficult task, I think, and potentially run into some kinds of liabilities, that we don't want to even get into.
Ted, that would
Pam,
be
you're raising your-
union.
yeah, Pam, you're
There's
raising your hand.
unions there. So that, something like that is just not.
Oh, I'm just making something up. I'm
Yeah.
not, but
Yeah, yeah.
Pam was
Pam-
raising her hand. Pam?
Yeah.
I think we're
understand.
getting outside of the agenda topic.
I think yeah, we are getting outside the agenda topic by talking about the very specific things, but I think,
Very specific things, yeah.
but I do think the agenda topics is to say, what do we mean by structural changes? And so I think the idea is just to define the committee. I've have two volunteers who are willing to work on this, and Ted and Cheryl. Now, the problem with, normally we'd have 3 members. We can't really do that at this point without the new member, without the vacancy being filled. So I think at this point, Cheryl, are you free? Let me ask you, are you free to do this in the coming month, or do you really think? you
I
have a
don't know, Ted, because we're waiting for referrals and
You don't know, yeah.
surgeries. So
I think
don't know.
I think for now, if it has to be a 2-member committee,
Okay,
and I think I'll volunteer myself and Ted to be the committee, if that's okay with Ted.
yeah,
We work together. And as chair, I'm my prerogative as chair, I'll appoint the ad hoc committee to be Ted and Siegler and myself to proceed with this work and report, obviously, prepare a report back. Now, hopefully soon we'll have a 5th member, a regular member. And at that point, we can add someone to the committee.
there you go.
Yeah, so that will be, hopefully a month or 2, no more than 2 months, but hopefully in a month.
Well,
So for now, I've hereby appoint a subcommittee, ad hoc subcommittee for the strategic plan objective of identifying potential structural changes to address underfunded, under-resourced, and understaffed services support needs, consisting of myself and Ted Siegler. First of all, I guess I should actually have asked for public comment, and I'm being a little sloppy with that since there's only one attendee who I believe is not in a position to comment because he's a board member. So I will do that next time. I'm sorry.
Tom, can I
Ted.
suggest one other thing? That this committee have a specific duration not to exceed 6 months or something like that. We've got, it's the next agenda item coming up. But we've got a whole bunch of leftover committees with people who aren't on or subcommittees with people who aren't on the committee anymore. And it's just kind of messy if we don't put a specific sunset.
I think that's perfectly reasonable, because I think the strategic plan objective is formulated to give it a very specific deadline, which is actually long, a lot earlier than 6 months.
Yeah, no, I just
But we can.
I just was thinking as a matter of practice, if each time we appoint a committee, its duration should not be to exceed 6 months unless extended.
Mhm.
And that way we can pare down the list and keep it fresh and relevant.
I think
They
that's-
agree.
Yeah, I don't think that actually needs a action by the committee. It's the full committee, but it's just a good practice. to do that as a, for the chair to do that. But I think all ad hoc committees at both board level and the committee level should have a 6-month life, unless they have, unless there's external circumstances make it difficult for them to complete their work in 6 months. That's just my own view on ad hoc committees and board committees. I think if they haven't done the work in 6 months, then there's either they didn't have enough to do or too much to do. Speaking of the committees, I wanted to move on to item 3C, which is to review that list of committees. And again, this is not necessarily for action. Wait a second. Yeah, the ad hoc subcommittee roster. It's in your packet at the end, and Ted was making reference to it. The reason I brought this up is that we were discussing whether there was a committee already in existence that hadn't ended its work on the reserve policy, consisting of Ted and Marvin. And in fact, Pam sent me this list, which is actually on the website of the finance committee. I found out with all of the history of the subcommittees that we've had, the ad hoc subcommittees. And it turned out that there is a reserve fund policy committee, which was appointed in 2019. The committee was formally closed on February 18th, 2020. So it no longer is an active ad hoc committee. So that question is answered. The reason I wanted to bring this back up, though, was to bring this list up to date and to maybe specify in reference to Ted's question or his point, what committees are actually still active and still in existence. They're actually looking at this list. I see none of the committees, except for the very last one, the Water and Wastewater Rate Increases Committee, having not been formally closed. In other words, they've done their work and the formal action has been taken to close them, or at least the record shows they've been closed. But one of them at the end here is, there's two of them actually, I'm sorry. There's the Barwell Wells, rate study, which the committee was opened on July 30th, 2019, and it's still open, which is probably should be dealt with. And then the Water and Wastewater Rate Increases Committee, that was formed on April 28th, 2020, and that was never formally closed. And so I do think we need to just bring those up to date, which I think is just a ministerial matter that the chairman can do. We also need to add the committee that was formed for the first of the two strategic objectives regarding underfunded services and activities. It was formed, and we can go back to record the date on when it was formed, but as of today, I think we can say it's been closed. And then we can add the committee that's just been formed today, consisting of Ted and myself, and put this on the list, put that one on the list and say that's been opened, and then we just have it obviously on record as being there. When it's closed, it's closed. And the other question is, and I'll just take suggestions on this, what we do with, I think the Reserve Fund Policy Committee, if it has continued work to do, it should be restarted in some fashion. So I'm asking for suggestions on how to do that last one. If we just say it's been restarted, same people, or if anybody else wants to be on it, I'm open to that too. But my suggestion is that we just put that as having been either restarted as a separate line item or restarted under their reserve fund policy heading that's there now.
So the reserve fund policy, would that be future agenda item? This is old.
Well, the reserve fund, that's kind of complicated. Let me ask, because it's complicated because it was a future agenda item to go back and re-examine the reserve fund policy. And Marvin had raised that as a future agenda item. We put this on the agenda we put this in business. And then I think Ted has also had some comments on what needs to be done to either update the policy or make it more, make some of the reporting of reserves more transparent or detailed. So there does seem to be work that needs to be done on that issue, according to the two members. Marvin, yes.
Yeah, Tom, it appears that we actually have two reserve policies in effect. The one Ted and I developed, and then there was apparently a pre-existing reserve policy that is still out there. So I would suggest that perhaps there be an effort to review the reserve policies, consolidate or change or whatever, so that we get to one reserve policy that we're all in agreement on.
So we don't have two out there.
There's not
The
two?
old- No, the old one would have been revised by the one that was newest adopted,
Okay,
The old one was superseded. The old one was superseded by the new one.
correct?
The old one is no longer in effect. It's out there as a document, a historical document, but it's not a current policy. And in light
Okay.
of that, my question too is that I'm wondering if we need to do this, if we need need to revisit the reserve fund policy, the one with this, restart the committee essentially. Because if we don't, I can see not doing it. But Marvin, you had raised it. You raised the point. You'd make the request for the policy committee to be restarted or started. And I think both you and Ted had some questions that you wanted to see maybe clarified.
and Ted, weigh in, please, but Pam, the policy, then if there's one official policy that is in place today, does not have any bounds set, what the objective is or the goal is for the maximum and the minimum reserves. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that is what the charge was from the board most recently, is to set those. The board requested that the committee review this and set those limitations.
Bounds, yep.
Ted.
Yeah, the existing policy that you and I wrote, Marvin, does have a target maximum
Mhm.
of unassigned reserve at 50% of the year's revenues.
Mhm.
So, that is in place. The issues, if we want to reopen, that I think we need to examine are how does the language in the policy match up with the accounting? And are we talking about internal accounting, or are we talking about the audit report? Because the audit report shows that we have in the general fund, for instance, I think it's $3.6 million of assigned retained earnings.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, and so fund balance. And
Right.
so if so then we've got to figure out, okay, well, exactly how is that assigned, and what, is the reserve policy really about fund balance, or is it about something that's on our books as a reserve? And if it's on our books as a reserve, are we talking about internal accounting, or are we talking about the financial accounting as defined in the audit report? So, so those are the kinds of questions that we probably need to dig into, because right now the policy says that you have the various classes of reserve, encumbered and committed and assigned, being what they are. and then unassigned as a maximum of a half year. So I'm not clear on whether the assigned fund balance was actually assigned to anything. And if it wasn't, then is it really unassigned, in which case it should be measured against the maximum in the policy.
That was something I noticed too, that I know Pam wants to weigh into this. We don't want to get off the agenda again.
Right, we don't want to get off the agenda. So I think what the board requested is that it only has a 50% in there. So what does 50% equate to? I mean, that was, I think what they were struggling with.
50%, I think it was defined
Right.
as 50% of annual revenues.
Right, but I think that they had wanted, when they were looking at all these future general fund projects that were in the hopper. You know, we've got the skate park funding. We've got, funding additional 3 fire staff. We've got, the restrooms at the Fiscalini Ranch. We've got all these potential expenditures happening that will be general funded. I think what they were struggling to get was, what should our drop, lowest balance be in the general fund? What do we
Yeah,
need? Because if water doesn't have the reserve of 50% and wastewater doesn't have the reserve of 50%, we need to make sure that the general fund can back them up, less their 50% of operational reserves. So what I got out of the discussion is that, they wanted more detail and some really hard numbers, listed in the policy. That's why I
Okay.
think it's being revised, not to compare it to the audit. That's
Okay,
not what
well,
I'm thinking it needs to be revised for.
I will say that a minimum is nonsense, because the whole point of a reserve is having funds set aside for something
That's not
that
what I'm
you
saying.
can't define.
That's not what I'm
And-
saying.
Okay,
I'm
but-
saying is, like, do we want to leave the general fund with $1 million of a balance? Is that the drop dead amount we want to see in the general fund, and everything else can be exhausted? Or do they want 2 million in the general fund? I think
But
that's what they're looking
that's
for.
that's a wholly different conversation than
Right.
the reserve policy.
So I guess the question is, do we need to revive the committee or not? That's our real question.
The reserve policy won't answer the question that you were just asking.
Well, it could, if it was crafted in the proper way, it could, it very well could.
No, at
Well, I
least
don't agree.
I won't volunteer to be on a committee that tries to do that in a reserve policy. What you're talking about is actually the meat and potatoes, I think, of this underfunded projects issue, and that's got to fit with whatever the policy for reserves requires. But that, then we have our definitional issues that I was just bringing up. But setting and saying that we have to have a minimum reserve is in my opinion, nonsense, because the whole point of a reserve is to have funds that will be used if it's necessary to use them. And if you say, well, we have to maintain a minimum, then you're not allowing those funds to be used, and that's where the whole thing breaks down.
We're not building bank accounts.
Well, yeah, I think we might have to leave this discussion till later, because it may be too detailed, but it sounds like we're talking about a rainy day fund in a way. I mean, we're talking about a contingency, some kind of contingency fund for the unforeseen or for future needs and so forth. I don't know,
And and Tom, quite frankly, that is the definition of assignment. And the assignment is something that the board needs to do. It's not something that we're going to be able to write into a policy. It's board action to assign reserve funds to specific purposes.
I agree.
And now, of course, that the question becomes, the definition of assigned reserves, and also the reporting of assigned reserves as to what is assigned to what, which is also not very visible to me.
Well, it's not. It's
Fine, we
it's
got it.
Yeah,
We're
Pam,
off topic again.
we're off topic. Yeah,
We're off topic.
I think for now, Marvin wants to weigh in. It sounds like the committee is going to remain closed if nobody else wants. If we don't want to, if it's two, especially the two original members both don't want to restart it. I think we'll leave the reserve policy in place unless somebody has a different idea, because I don't want to reopen the committee for when there's no agreement as to what it's going to be doing. I just leave it closed, and we come back. Maybe the board will come back with maybe some instructions as to what they want to see in terms of a contingency fund or a rainy day fund or something like that, because I think we're talking about slightly different things here, or maybe quite different things. So I could leave it, and as chair, I'll just say let's just leave it as it is. The list, however, we will add, and I'll update it with Pam's help if necessary. We'll update the list to include the new committee and also the committee that was just completed its work, so we have an up-to-date list of the history. And I would suggest with the two committees that have that are listed here as open, I will. If nobody objects, I will simply say they were closed. They are hereby closed as of today, as of this meeting. So we do it cleanly, and the record will show that they're no longer active.
Correct.
So if anybody has any,
You need a vote?
we don't need a vote on that, no.
Yeah. So Tom, the committee for reviewing Bartles and Wells, that one should also be closed.
Yeah, there are two there, the Bartle Wells one and the one on the wastewater and wastewater rate increases. Now, of course, there may be a new committee on a Bartle Wells report, which is going to be coming down the pike in a couple of months, hopefully.
Yeah,
but
right. But the existing one should be closed, no action.
Yeah, so now I'll duly note that, and we'll update the list as it appears on the website. Yeah. So moving on, we have a couple of reports from the finance manager. One of them is the item 3D, latest on the fiscal year 2021 audit. Ms. Duffield.
So there's no change in the report from the last reporting that I did in the month of September. We're still scheduled to start the audit the 8th of November.
Okay. Any questions? Any public comment? Okay, hearing none, I'll move along to the next item, which is the update on Tyler Encode. And we're maybe coming down to the final, to the last of these, almost, not quite, but let's find out what's going on with Tyler Encode, Pam.
Yeah, sure. So our project team for implementation is kind of dwindling. So most of the modules that we purchased have been programmed and have been put into place. The one that I'm still working on is the fixed asset module, and then wastewater is still actively working on the work order module. All the other modules have been put into place. You just saw today that the budget module has been put into use. So Tyler is pretty comfortable with taking the implementation team down to the next level. They're not closing the implementation group completely. You know, we still have to go through a few processes throughout the next year that we haven't encountered yet. Calendar year end, which will include, you know, preparing of the W-2s in January and preparing of the 1099s in January. We still haven't gone through that process yet in Tyler, so there'll be some additional training that we need, more intense than just a refresher user training. And then fiscal year end will be the other piece that they will keep the implementation team together for us for. So they're going to be lessening the amount of meetings that we're having. Currently, the board ad hoc committee, which is comprised of Tom and Don Howell, we all meet every other Wednesday, and we have for, oh gosh, 2.5 years by now, I guess. It's been quite a long time. But those meetings are coming to an end, and they're going to just have us meet as needed. So as we need, you know, or maybe once a month or something like that. So we're kind of tailoring down those meetings, and we're just continuing to put the modules that we were trained on into use on a daily basis.
Thank you. Any questions? It's good to see that the progress will be made. And I guess the evidence of the progress is today, we saw today, especially in the report on the budget. So it's good to hear that we're.
Yeah, that's a few different modules that you see. You
Yes.
see utility billing in that report. You see accounts payable in that report. You see the general ledger was programmed in that report. What else? You see purchasing, the budget module. You know, you're seeing a lot of what, you know, was put into the system as a whole in just those few pages that you look at.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Pam. Is there any public comment on this item? I don't see any hands raised. I can look and see. No. So to move on, thank you, Pam, again for that.
You're welcome.
Any future agenda items that a member of the committee wants to present or propose?
I like to see that topic removed. Because this comes from the board. This whole thing comes from the board. We have no, you know, when we bring suggestions, they get nixed. So I don't know. Go ahead. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I just don't think that we on this committee qualify for future agenda items, because these are all board items. These are all board things that we get, Tom.
Well,
sorry.
yeah,
I thought.
the reason for keeping it, I think, is that if a board member, we had a little demonstration of this today. In fact, if a board member wants to bring up an issue, it can go to a board member, say a committee member, sorry, wants to bring up an issue, a topic, it can be brought to the board, and the board can come back and say, you know, can assign it essentially. I mean, it can go to the board as, you know, it can be put on the board agenda by the chair of the board as something that they might assign the committee to do.
Correct.
The issue that we were talking about, for instance, with the reserve policy, it might actually be something that the board would come back with an assignment or a request for further work for this committee to do in the area of how much do we want to set aside as a contingency fund or a rainy day fund or something of that nature, separate from the reserve policy itself. So it's not pointless for us to bring things up in the process of.
I have. I have.
That's why I think that the agenda items, you know, as long as they're in the field of, in the area of our jurisdiction or our activity, which is, as I said, kind of being the I think I said in an earlier meeting, be sort of the ways and means. We're sort of the ones that how do we handle them? How does the district handle its money, and how does it get stuff paid for? And the financing of everything is kind of our area. So anything that's in that realm is relevant to bring up as a future agenda item, which I might, as chair, take back to the board for further consideration. And then it comes back to us. So yeah, it's an interesting question. It's a good question, but I do think it's valuable to have a future agenda items in the meeting. Keep that channel open. Are there any future agenda items from anybody? Having said that. Ted?
Speak now or hold your peace.
Yeah, you're just lighting up there. You're okay, great. Well, I'm happy that we could we had a productive meeting and didn't get too far off the agenda. And
just one other comment.
yes.
Yes, there was a celebration of life event held this past Saturday for our departed member, Dwayne Lee. A very, very nice tribute to Dwayne, and was very well attended. Finance manager Duffield was there, and a number of people from the community. So yeah, it was a great tribute and a good way to say farewell to our departed member.
Karen Bean did an amazing job.
Yeah, she did.
Put it together.
She did an amazing job. Bless Karen for that. Your hubby's cute.
Thank you, Marvin, for mentioning that. Anything else from anybody? Oh, I hereby declare the meeting adjourned at 11:33 a.m.
Hey, Tom, do we know, is there been applicants?
Oh, I mentioned at the beginning, no, there have not been any applicants. So if anybody is interested, let them know that they can just go to the website and download the form and turn it in. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Yeah,
You
you
too.
too.
Bye-bye.